sense that one will never come to an ultimate boundary dividing this place from some other. Across the centuries, Gothics by women expose an obligatory sanctuary as actually a cage. More and more emphatically, they urge escape. In 1847, Charlotte Brontë publishes Jane Eyre, doubling by multiplication to enable feminine agency. Such doubling evades the booby traps of a given system by supplying multiple players to do what no single player could, given the contradictory rules that define his or her role. Unbeknownst to Jane, her employer, Edward Rochester, has a Creole wife he has designated lunatic and locked in his attic. Gradually, she manifests, appearing first as an uncanny echo to Jane's thoughts, and then as a distorted reflection in Jane's mirror. Bertha Mason Rochester resists violently, implementing Jane's mistrust of Rochester's egotism as Jane herself cannot, schooled in subordination as she is. She protests when Rochester tries to decorate her like a doll, but he scoffs, insisting she accept a lavish bridal veil. Bertha intervenes, functioning as the most threatening avatar of Jane herself. Bertha rips and tramples the veil, destroying that emblem of coverture, a wife's legal absorption into her husband. Repeatedly, Rochester discredits Jane's perception. Even confirmed by the torn veil, her vision is illusory, the creature of an overstimulated brain. When Bertha is finally revealed, Rochester frames her as bad, mad, and embruted, specifying only what she lacked: modesty, benevolence, and refinement, qualities designated feminine to keep women quiet. As a younger son, Rochester sought a wealthy wife. Fortune hunting though he was, he claims he was cheated. He charges numerous vices, but names only one. Allegedly, Bertha is unchaste. Viewing marriage as ownership of a wife, Rochester finds agency in a woman, sexual or otherwise, threatening and abhorrent. Bertha embodies the wild zone that defied Imperial Britain's dream of white masculine dominance, predicated on racial, biological, and social determinism. Bertha escapes patriarchy's prison by burning down Thornfield, which in collapsing cripples its master. Chastened into interdependency, Rochester can meet Jane on level ground. By impelling Jane to flee bigamy, Bertha enables the union of equals that closes the novel. She herself, though, commits suicide. She's smashed on the pavement, dead as the stones on which her brains and blood were scattered. Brontë leaves us to realize we've heard only from Rochester. In 1966, Wide Sargasso Sea gives voice to Bertha Mason. Jean Rhys exposes costs of British colonialism uncharted by Brontë. Here, Bertha is Antoinette. Rochester renames her Bertha in an effort to nullify her past and stifle her sensuality. In the West Indies of the 1830s, Antoinette's position is radically marginal. A Creole born into a slave-owning family, she is a child when emancipation frees the slaves, abolishing plantation culture. Neither English nor native, she is hated by both. A white cockroach, that's me. I often wonder who I am and where is my country and why I was ever born. Here, Edward Rochester is a cold, resentful younger son, disoriented by a place wild, untouched, and filled with an alien, disturbing loveliness. We see Antoinette through her childhood and convent education and into that attic in Thornfield, and we watch Rochester yoking racism and misogyny to colonize his wife. For him, Antoinette is an object, and when she laughs, weeps, and desires, he is revolted. Women have long been seen as fulfilling the desires of men and or threatening their power. From a phallocentric vantage, as Julia Kristeva explains, women represent the necessary frontier between men and chaos, but because of their marginality, they will always also seem to recede into and merge with the chaos of the outside. This liminal position enables masculine culture to both elevate women and to vilify them. Thus, Rochester frames Antoinette's sensuality as loose and dangerous. She thirsts for anyone, not for me. She'll loosen her black hair and laugh and coax and flatter. She'll moan and cry and give herself as no sane woman would or could or could. He determines to reduce her to property. She's mad, he says, but mine, mine. Antoinette meets the same end as Bronte's Bertha, but Antoinette does more than flame her jailer's house. In her mind, which Rhys lets us access, she is going home, reunited with Tia, her childhood friend and looking-glass self. A dream foreshadows her waking action. I turned round and I saw the sky. It was red and all my life was in it. I saw Aunt Cora's patchwork, all colors. I saw the orchids and the jasmine and the tree of life in flames. The man who hated me was calling, "Bertha, Bertha." The wind caught my hair and it streamed out like wings. It might bear me up if I jumped to those hard stones. But when I looked over the edge, I saw Colibri. Tia was there. I called Tia and I jumped. Like Bronte in 1847, Jean Rhys, writing in 1966, shows the feminine being alienated, isolated, and locked up. But Rhys lets the lunatic speak, so we know she's not mad, but lethally misused. Even in 1892, a woman writer had given voice to a wife entrapped and imprisoned. With The Yellow Wallpaper, Charlotte Perkins Gilman critiques the norms that require of a woman silence, obedience, and unending tedium. In turn-of-the-century America, a nameless wife is infantilized, little girl, blessed little goose, and directed to rest from her work her husband thinks too taxing, her writing. As a physician of high standing, he diagnoses hysteria and denies her company, stimulation, and access to her child. Slowly, tenderly, he is training her into passivity. And what is one to do, she asks. Allegedly, it is for her own good. Left to look at the wallpaper, she finds it dull enough to confuse the eye, but pronounced enough to provoke study. Curiously, its lines destroy themselves in contradictions when she seeks an organizing principle. There isn't one. The pattern is nonsense and, as such, maddening. Powerless to alter her circumstances, the wife slips away from reality and into a mutant sort of autonomy. She identifies herself with a woman she sees behind the wallpaper's senseless design. Together, they break its silly bars, allowing the wife to creep unimpeded. This captive, though, is a writer. Surreptitiously, she has recorded the rest cure that has driven her mad, and that record stands to inform and outrage others. The wallpaper's fungoid odor, its smell of old, foul, bad, yellow things, is the very whiff of the past. If you perceive the past as undead, stuff to animate and galvanize and replay, later writers will replay, insisting that women can free themselves without sacrificing their sanity. In 1984, Joyce Carol Oates revisits the American 1890s in a postmodernist Gothic, Mysteries of Winterthorn. Mysteries disrupts conventional social codes, ravaging history to reveal its concealed other, and examining the practices its silence legitimates and reinforces. Set in a long ago America that suggests contemporary times, Mysteries unmasks oppression still with us, hyperbolizing impenetrable networks of masculine power. At home and in public, Winterthorn is dominated by racism, classism, xenophobia, and misogyny. White, upper-class Christian men rule without check, committed to the illusion that they control the world unilaterally. Erasmus Kilgarvan, Justice of Winterthorn, batters both his wives as Dr. Hatch, the city physician, looks on. Alas, that such gentle, pretty, sweet-natured creatures should prove so awkward and so prone to accident as to be forever bruising and banging their heads, torsos, and pelvic regions, their thighs, cracking their ribs and blacking their eyes in nocturnal tumbles from bed, scratching, cutting, and even stabbing themselves, loosening their teeth, dislocating their fingers, even rupturing their spleens in falls into the cellar that would have been more comical had they been less pathetic. Even after his death, Erasmus haunts Glenmar Manor. His 3 daughters have internalized their subjection. When a cousin visits, Georgina begs her not to judge them harshly. They're not morbid, but only his. The mansion's opulent honeymoon room features a painting in which infantile angels surround the Virgin Mary, animated by the angry spirits of 5 infants Georgina bore her father and strangled. They double their mother, manifesting agency repressed to the point of lethal rage. Any man who occupies the honeymoon room, the angels devour. Georgina publishes poems signed Iphigenia, at once veiling and proclaiming who she is, her father's sacrificial victim. Erasmus himself, though, sends women to the gallows for infanticide, even in cases of rape. When Franny Flaxen seeks wild things, woman's right to vote, to practice birth control and celibacy, the Brethren of Jericho abduct and torture her. That assault, Winterthorn decides Franny provoked. Valentine Westergaard, aristocrat, dandy, and sadist, tortures to death 5 working-class women. He murders artfully, applauded by his peers. In open court, Colleen Colgarvin confesses. She is filthy and must be punished. Tighter, says master, and tighter until her foul tongue protrudes. Only you and I are equal to the task, as with the other repulsive creatures, so determined to provoke manly rage in their thrashings and sobbings and bloody discharges. For sport, says master, now it is time, says master, for sheer divine sport. Valentine confirms Colin, but excuses himself. He had been possessed by an evil ghost and compelled to bring him 5 brides, newly dead. The verdict, not guilty. Winterthorn is a self-enclosed moral wasteland. The Kilkite clan and the Brethren of Jericho propagate and act on anti-Semitism and white supremacy. Misogyny is ubiquitous. Growing up, Perdita Kilgarvan learns to loathe her sex. Taught that any woman, not an angel, is a beast, she decides to subdue her sexuality by marrying a sanctimonious hypocrite from whom she expects a wondrous cleansing amnesia of her sin-stained soul. But Perdita finds domestic life a daily misery. Scolded and silenced to the point of explosiveness, she moves. To empower Perdita, Oates channels the story of Lizzie Borden, acquitted in 1892 of a double murder she surely committed. As Victoria Lincoln notes, Lizzie's defense won only because the human race interprets facts according to its emotional needs. The all-male jury that acquitted Lizzie needed to think their own wives and daughters incapable of an act so forthright, so downright masculine as murder. Perdita takes an axe to her husband and a doting parishioner, arranging the bodies to suggest adultery and capping the display with a mocking array of hearts. Having recognized femininity as a masquerade, she engages its theater. She claims rape. The murderer had his way with me. And Dr. Hatch drugs her into genteel helplessness. In her writhing distress, the police noticed Perdita is a wondrous creature, blessed with a luxuriant head of hair and a mouth that boasted both voluptuousness and icy chastity. Abashed, they shuffle off, leaving her to sleep and forgetting. Perdita plays to Winterthorn's folly. As a woman, she's never tried. Oates exposes a system of justice that is anything but, then allows a woman to exploit its illusions. In Winterthorn, men collude to batter, debase, even destroy women, and Perdita's crime is a triumph. Like Oates, whose Gothic reflects what we are, Jeanette Winterson writes not private dream, but shared human connection, tracing the possibilities of past and future in the whirl of now. The Daylight Gate, published in 2012, was commissioned by Hammer, a British studio best known for horror films. It engages a real time and place, an England ruled by a fiercely Protestant king, James I, whose fears set the tone and feel of a century that confused Catholicism, chemistry, and witchcraft, in the process demonizing feminine agency. In 1612, the Pendle witch trial condemned to death 2 men and 8 women, among them one Alice Nutter, an atypical target given her wealth and gentry status. Imagining her subjectivity, Winterson invests her Alice with the agency that daunts most men of her time. Her fortune derives from a magenta dye that produces the curious effect of looking like water on fire. Defying convention, Alice dares the charge of unnatural, bestriding her copper mare, commanding her falcon, preserving her beauty with herbal elixir. When she takes a woman as lover, their desire is radiant. Looking into her eyes was like looking into another life. She stroked me till I had nothing in my mind but the color of magenta. Alice well knows the magic of our own minds. We are worlds, she says, compressed into human form. The daylight gate is another name for dusk, the liminal hour when light turns to dark and the living meet the dead. In this novella, history and fantasy come alive together, and Winterthorn lays on the Gothic horror. A prisoner is skinned alive, a spider speaks, a woman bites out the tongue of a rapist. Pendle's alleged witches are a motley crew, beggars, hags, herbalists, women engaged simply in self-defense. Some think they harness the supernatural, others trade on the fear of witchcraft to fend off aggression. They have no power in your world, Alice tells a magistrate. They must get what power they can in theirs. Purported witches are locked below ground. Misery, emaciation, rot, suffering, rats. Humans know truly how to strip a human being of being human. Women are victimized, surely, but they also fight back. Mindful of her horoscope, born in fire, warmed by fire to depart, Alice takes charge of her death. Like their king, the rabble demonized all difference. Witchery, popery, witchery, both are high treason. When a crucifix is found in her bed, Alice refuses to betray her Jesuit lover and is charged with witchcraft. A witch with a crucifix, am I accused of the Black Mass or the High Mass? Whatever you are, she hears, you are facing death. Convicted, Alice is led to the gallows, these words ringing in her mind. Choose your death, or your death will choose you. She summons her falcon, exposing her throat. The falcon dives, and in one swift movement severs her jugular. Alice does indeed depart by fire, clad in the fire of her gorgeous magenta, and inflamed by love, by courage, by will. As Winterthorn reminds us, women have never been so helpless as some would have them be. Curious writers, revisionists, reimagine, recast, and retell. Curiosity, says Michel Foucault, is a readiness to find what surrounds us strange and odd, a certain determination to throw off familiar ways of thought and look at the same things in a different way, a lack of respect for the traditional hierarchies. Here's to those storytellers who invoke then to invigorate our sense of agency now. Do you have any questions?
You said at the beginning about how Gothics are mostly written by women and the audience is mostly women. What's up with that?
Well, okay. So in Gothic fictions, there's this important distinction between horror and terror, and it kind of is a gendered conversation. Anne Radcliffe made that distinction, and she was a really important Gothic writer in the 1790s. But horror, she said, contracts, freezes, and nearly annihilates both sense and spirit. So horror is usually made manifest by this like explicit shattering of assumed norms. Really violent. It'll leave characters in like various states of like physical or psychological dissolution. And then terror, on the other hand, is this like creeping state that comes on really slowly, where the source of fear is not identifiable because it's diffuse and on all sides and inescapable. And that is what women writers have sort of been really good at capturing for a long time, because historically they've lived like with and within cruelty. So in early fictions, you can see that with like the architecture, those stairways and doors and everything multiplying, this like, there's no end, that like, that's the big like patriarchal edifice that sort of traps them. And then there was this second movement of Gothic fictions that was also dominated by women called the marital Gothic, which took up where that first movement left off in the home of like a newly wedded couple. So it's sort of, the genre has sort of been dominated by women in a sense because they hyperbolize that inescapability and that fear being like on all sides. So that's like the terror Gothic, which is kind of what they write. And then in masculine authored Gothics, the like source of evil will usually eventually be revealed, and it's sort of like embodied by a specific thing, if that makes sense. Okay.
And so we put a stake through its heart and its head.
Yeah, and then you can see it, so then you can deal with it.
One more question? Anybody?
I'm just thinking about the I think you referred to it as postmodern, like the people that are returning to it. But
Right.
thinking about where terror fits in, because there's systems, right? I mean, it seems like, especially though we've got systems that are in place.
Right.
And that can be obviously as diffuse.
Yes.
But does that, in terms of thinking of if you reveal it as something, you can fight against it, like is part of what's going on in terms of naming, there's something about systems that I'm wanting to ask you.
Okay, well, I think that's interesting. In Oates, I think what Oates does a really good job of showing is how for women and those like abjected subjects who are not the, you know, the powerful white Christian men, everyone who's like cast off around them, Winterthorn is this like complete wasteland where you can't necessarily point fingers at one specific person because all of the institutions and all of these like city fathers are kind of reinforcing one another's discourse. So in a sense, I would say that is sort of a form of terror because it's like 360 degrees of like you can't escape. But there are also, I think the horror terror thing, any fiction can kind of feature combinations of those two things. So there are also a lot of like really kind of violent and gory scenes in that book. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
Better than I asked.
Okay.
Anna, please come back. No, no, no.